So we are officially 4 days away from the end of the most annoying, aggressive, and colorful month of the year, Pride Month. But sadly, the grooming, exploitation, and sexualization of children is a 365, 24/7 mission that we must confront boldly and unapologetically. So let's talk about the left's version of the Star-Spangled Banner, shall we? The trans pride flag. Well, it turns out the flag's creator has a past that's concerning to say the least. Joining me now to break it down is licensed therapist and social worker Pamela Garfield-Jaeger. Pamela, it's so great to have you, and we've got so much to dig into, but I want to start with this Monica Helms, right? Really being hailed by the left, the creator of this trans flag. There's some disturbing history and backstory here in a memoir penned by Monica Helms herself, that I really want you to explain to my audience because I haven't heard a lot of publicity on it.
Yeah, I read about this from a woman named Genevieve Gluck. She is the one that founded Redux magazine, and she's done extensive research on this memoir and short stories that this man has written. And I don't think most of the left, most of the people who are following the left are aware of this man. And basically, he writes about how he, since age 12, used to steal his mother's panties and underwear and wear them and get really excited by it. He also wrote about stealing underwear from the public laundry room, or I think the one in his apartment complex, and getting aroused by wearing women's underwear in private.
Yeah.
Those are a few things.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Again, so some on the left might not find that problematic. I mean, everybody's got their weird thing, don't get me wrong, but there's so much in this memoir, if you really go through it, and with the cross-dressing and the fetishizing, the cross-dressing and kind of forcing this lifestyle on his then wife. I mean, there's a lot of backstory here, but this person really is hailed as a hero by the left for creating this trans flag, right? You know, it used to just be LGB, now it's TQA++, minus. I mean, it seems like every day that there's a new stripe or something added to this flag, but this goes even further than that. I know that you're really anxious to talk about this because just last week we saw that there was a symbol for autism that's now been added to this trans pride flag, which seems a little out of place to me. Can you explain what this is and why we might be concerned about it?
Yeah, that infinity symbol, that represents people who are neurodivergent, they say sometimes, or people who are on the autistic spectrum. And I mean, this is because many people who are identifying as trans are autistic. I see this as they're preying on the vulnerable. They're preying on people who have the tendency to get drawn in by this trans identity because they have rigid thinking, they struggle socially, they're online a lot, so they tend to be more easily groomed. They have very obsessive thoughts, and they're trying to find a way to feel better and feel like they can fit in society. And this trans identity is sold as this sort of magic pill. And instead of kind of hiding behind the fact that they're preying on people who are more vulnerable in this situation, they're celebrating it with a flag, which is it's really hard for me to wrap my head around.
A lot of this is about exploitation, and that's what I fear. So LGB, you know, and then even the T in some people's situations is kind of understandable. But now it really feels like the LGB of the whole thing has gone by the wayside, and it's more about the T and the Q and the plus and the whatever else they've added to it. And that's where I feel a lot of the exploitation comes in with young people, whether they be autistic or not, looking for some place to belong. So they identify as something. They start changing their actual biology, their physicality to match that. But it feels like it's more of an exploitation. And as you said, a grooming. But in states like yours in California, unfortunately, it feels like this is the letter of the law to affirm this. And I know that you go against the grain on that, but there's a lot coming up in California AB 957, which states that the health and safety and welfare of a child includes a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity. So if it passes, it would be child abuse. If one parent doesn't affirm a child's identity and the other one does, this could be weaponized in custody cases. So this is going far beyond some parades and some flags and some debauchery with bondage in front of children. This is actually going down to the core of the family. What is this going to mean for California?
Yeah, this is really scary for California. And full disclosure, I will not be staying in California much longer because it's just too much. But California is really making a concerted effort to divide children from their families and to make sure children become lifelong medical patients and to just destroy their psychiatric well-being. In the bill, it actually says how this is for the well-being of children. And it actually cites the fact that there are studies that say that if you affirm a child that their mental health will improve. However, they don't say what the studies are. And the reason for that is because none of these studies are valid. They've all been retracted because that is just simply a lie. And every time in the long run, this will hurt their mental health.
Yeah, and again, you've got people that are grown adults that waited until they were 60 plus years to transition, that truly have gender dysphoria, like a Caitlyn Jenner, for example. But then you've got young people that don't know what they are. And as you said, a lot of them are on the spectrum with some kind of a learning disability. So how is this going to impact, especially kids with learning disabilities, if they are automatically affirmed? What does the rest of their life look like after that takes place at a young age?
Well, it depends on how far they go on their path, but even just psychologically, this will send them on a tailspin. Walt Heyer, he is an older gentleman, detransitioner. He is now 82 years old, and he says he's still talking about what he calls the trauma of when he was 4 years old, when his grandmother affirmed him in this purple dress. And he says the reason he considers this abuse because his grandmother was giving him the message that he was not okay as a little boy, that as a little girl or wearing clothing of a little girl made him worth something. And this was traumatizing for him. And in the end, he also was abused by his stepbrother and other people in his family. And he did become transgender for 9 years in the 80s and has since come around. And he likens it all to this being affirmed when he was a young boy. And so I could just see so many other little children going through this.
That's why we talk about it as child abuse, because that's largely what it is. And I can't help but think about hearing a lot of the backstory of a lot of these people that identify as transgender or non-binary, people that, especially in the activism community. I wonder if you pull back the layers here, and I know that you would know this better than me, we've talked about it before, but how many of these people in the younger years of their life, or even to this day, have suffered some kind of a sexual abuse or trauma, or have been a victim of pedophilia? Is that a common thread here when it comes to people that are now, non-binary, cross-dressing, identifying as queer? Is that something and a common thread that you've seen in abuse and how that ties all this together?
Yes, very much. That's very much a common thread. And I think we're exposing children to such young sexual content. Children are being exposed to porn early. They're just not developing correctly when they're developmentally ready to expose to all this sexual content. And that leaves them open to being more exploited and to become victims of sexual abuse. I think this is all a coordinated effort here. And yes, for sure, if you listen to the stories of most detransitioners, they will tell you almost all of them had some history of sexual abuse, sexual assault in their history.
Yeah, I was actually at an event last week, and the keynote speaker was somebody, a female who has been abused from the age of 4. For 14 years of her life, she was abused, sexually abused, sold by her grandfather for sex. And she described a time in college when she was very much on the left, chopped her hair off, didn't want to look feminine, wanted to be as butch looking as possible. And this wasn't because she was trans or thought she was a boy. This is because she was going out of her way to desexualize herself because she'd been sexualized for so many years. And I fear that that's going to be the same story with a lot of these people. But in California, if they come to a therapist such as yourself or somebody that isn't as truthful as you are, and they have this trauma, I mean, most therapists in your field, most psychiatrists, would they then tell them, hey, you should be a different gender? Would that be how this conversation goes?
Unfortunately, that's how therapists are being trained. I believe there are some out there that are like me, that are kind of secretly working through whatever the underlying issues are and working with the families and working with the child as a whole person. But unfortunately, those people are being intimidated and they're afraid of losing their licenses. So they're not as common. They're not as easy to find. But yes, that can happen, and that is happening. And that's what the training is telling us to do.
So, lastly, for parents out there that are watching this and they have children that they're concerned about, or even children that have come to them and said, I think I'm trans, what advice and what guidance would you give to those parents that are in an incredibly difficult position right now?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, my first advice is to not get into a power struggle with the child or the young adult, but also don't affirm them immediately. Have them grounded in reality. Probably the first thing you can do also is just remove their social media, remove their phone, because that's where a lot of this influence comes from. If you can, take them out of the school they're at. If you can, get them outdoors, get them to maybe a camp. It's summertime, so maybe you can get them into a camp, because a lot of this has to do with being disassociated from your body. And when you can get them more connected with their body physically, then one, they're just really tired and they can't ruminate on their gender, and two, they're more just embodied and they're more connected. Because I mean, I don't know if anybody's experienced that. When you're on the phone and you're scrolling, you kind of get in a daze, and you're more easily manipulated. Those are
Yeah.
just a few things.
Absolutely. And also get out of a state like California, which I'm happy to
Yeah.
hear that you will soon be leaving, coming to a state that protects children, I hope. But we appreciate you always for being so brave and so bold. I know it's not an easy thing to do, but there are a lot of people that look to you for inspiration and guidance. So thank you for always doing what you do, being transparent, truthful, and honest, especially in a crazy time like this. We always appreciate you. Of
Thank you so much for having me.
course.